I worked 2 jobs so my mother-in-law could relax. We don't need you, she said. I smiled. Fine. I quit and left, taking their money. They learned I left them with nothing. So picture this. I'm sitting here with my Diet Coke, finally relaxing. For the first time in literally months, and I figured I'd share this wild story with you guys. Because honestly, I'm still processing what went down, and maybe typing it all out will help me make sense of this absolute dumpster fire that was my life until recently. Let me paint you the scene. 3 years ago, I married this guy. Let's call him Jake. Real solid dude, or so I thought. We're talking about the kind of guy who'd help you move your couch up 3 flights of stairs without complaining, you know? The type who remembers your favorite order at Starbucks and actually listens when you're venting about work. We had this little apartment, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Then his mom gets diagnosed with some health issues. Nothing life-threatening, but she couldn't work her usual shifts at the department store anymore. Jake comes to me all stressed out, explaining how his mom's struggling financially, how she raised him as a single parent, the whole sob story. And look, I get it. Family's family, right? So when he suggested we move in with her to help out, I was like, sure, why not? Temporary situation, we'd save some money, help his mom get back on her feet. Win, win, win. Boy, was I naive? The house was this older place in a decent neighborhood. Nothing crazy, but definitely bigger than our apartment. His mom had been living there for like 20 years, so it was paid off. The plan was simple. We'd cover the utilities and groceries, help with her medical bills, and she could focus on getting better. I kept my job at the marketing firm, decent pay, but nothing spectacular. Jake worked construction, good money when the weather cooperated. At first, things were cool. His mom seemed grateful. We all got along fine. She'd cook dinner sometimes. We'd watch Netflix together. Very Brady Bunch vibes. But then something shifted, and I swear it happened overnight. It started with little comments. I'd come home from work, and she'd be like, oh, you're finally home. Jake's been here helping me with stuff all day. Mind you, Jake worked construction, so his schedule was all over the place depending on the job. Sometimes he'd be off for days. Sometimes he'd work 12-hour shifts. But somehow, in her mind, my consistent 9 to 5 made me the slacker. Then the requests started. Could I pick up her prescriptions on my lunch break? Could I swing by the grocery store after work? Could I handle the doctor's appointments because she didn't like driving in traffic? Each request seemed reasonable by itself, but they started piling up like dirty laundry. The real kicker came when she hurt her back gardening. Nothing serious, just pulled a muscle, but you'd think she'd been hit by a Mack truck the way she carried on. Suddenly, she couldn't do anything. Couldn't cook, couldn't clean, couldn't even walk to the mailbox apparently. And guess who became the live-in maid? Yours truly. Jake, bless his oblivious heart, didn't see the problem. His mom was hurting, I was capable. So naturally, I should help out. When I tried to explain that I was already working full-time and basically running the household, he'd get defensive. She raised me by herself, he'd say. This is temporary. That word, temporary, became my least favorite in the English language. Months passed. Her back got better, but somehow the helplessness didn't. I was doing all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, and working 40 hours a week. Meanwhile, she'd spend her days watching those daytime talk shows and complaining about everything from the weather to the neighbors to how I folded the towels wrong. Update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support so far. This story gets way crazier, and I'm honestly still shaking thinking about what happened next. Should I have seen the red flags earlier? The breaking point should have been when she started inviting her friends over for these elaborate lunch parties. I'm talking full spread. Sandwiches, salads, desserts, the works. And who do you think was expected to prepare and serve everything? That's right, me. I'd use my lunch breaks to rush home and set everything up, then clean up the mess when I got home from work, but the real breaking point came later. See, Jake's construction company hit a rough patch. The housing market was weird, permits were delayed, and suddenly he was out of work for almost 2 months. Our savings evaporated faster than water in the desert. I was stretching my paycheck to cover everything, and it wasn't enough. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I got a second job. Weekends at a retail store, nothing glamorous, but it helped pay the bills. 40 hours at the marketing firm, 16 hours folding clothes at Target, plus all the household stuff. I was running on maybe 5 hours of sleep a night and enough coffee to float a battleship. His mom's reaction to my second job? Well, I suppose someone has to work around here. Not a thank you, not an acknowledgement of the sacrifice, just passive-aggressive commentary. Jake thought I was being dramatic when I complained. She's just stressed about money, he'd say. Once I get back to work, things will go back to normal. Except things didn't go back to normal. Jake eventually found another construction gig, but by then, his mom had gotten comfortable with the arrangement. Why should she lift a finger when she had a built-in servant? And Jake, sweet, clueless Jake, couldn't see how his mom was taking advantage. The financial situation got worse before it got better. His mom's medical bills were higher than expected, and her insurance was garbage. We'd already burned through our savings, so I made a decision that seemed logical at the time. I opened a joint account with Jake and started funneling money from both my jobs into it. The idea was to have a household fund that we could all contribute to and use for shared expenses. Jake contributed when he could, but construction work is feast or famine. Some weeks he'd make bank, other weeks nothing. His mom was supposed to contribute her disability payments, but somehow there was always some excuse. The furnace needed fixing, she needed new medication, the car needed repairs. Every dollar that came in had somewhere else to go. Meanwhile, I'm working myself into the ground. 60-hour work weeks, plus cooking, cleaning, shopping, and playing chauffeur. My friends stopped calling because I was never available. My sister would text asking if I was still alive because I'd disappeared from social media. I was existing, not living, and for what? So his mom could have her stories on TV and complain about how the house wasn't clean enough? The joint account grew slowly but steadily. Between my two jobs, I was putting in maybe $3,000 a month. Jake would add a few hundred when he could. His mom contributed exactly zero, despite cashing her disability checks and somehow always having money for her weekly hair appointments and shopping trips with her friends. But here's the thing about being overworked and underappreciated: you start to notice things. Like how his mom would suddenly develop mysterious ailments whenever there was housework to be done, but feel perfectly fine for social activities. Or how she'd criticize everything I did while doing absolutely nothing herself. Or how Jake would automatically take her side in any disagreement, no matter how ridiculous. The final straw came on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just finished a particularly brutal week at both jobs, and I was looking forward to maybe sleeping in on my day off. I came downstairs that morning to find his mom hosting another one of her lunch parties, and she'd used every dish in the kitchen to prepare food. The sink was overflowing, the counters were covered in crumbs and spills, and there were dirty plates everywhere. When I asked if she could at least clean up after herself, she looked at me like I'd suggested she climb Mount Everest. "I'm too tired," she said. "Besides, you're so much better at cleaning than I am." That's when something inside me snapped. Not dramatically, not with yelling or crying, just a quiet, cold realization that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't going to get better, and I was done being taken advantage of. Update. The confrontation that followed changed everything. I'm literally getting goosebumps typing this next part because I still can't believe what came out of her mouth. "Are you ready for this level of audacity?" I took a deep breath and said, "I think we need to have a family meeting about how things are working around here." Jake was at work, so it was just me and his mom. I sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by the chaos of her lunch party, and tried to have a calm, rational conversation. I explained how I was working two jobs, handling all the household responsibilities, and contributing the most to our shared expenses, while she contributed nothing. I wasn't trying to be mean, just honest about the unsustainable situation. I suggested we create a chore schedule and figure out a fair way to split responsibilities. Her response? She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Honey, this is my house. I don't need to do anything I don't want to do. If you don't like it, you can leave. We don't need you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a barbecue gone wrong. We don't need you. After 3 years of sacrifice, of working myself to exhaustion, of putting their needs before my own, that's what it came down to. I wasn't family, I wasn't appreciated, I was just convenient labor that could be discarded when it became inconvenient. But here's the thing. Instead of getting upset, instead of arguing or crying or begging, I felt this weird sense of calm wash over me, like when you finally stop trying to fix something that's been broken beyond repair. I smiled, and I swear, it was the most genuine smile I'd felt in months. "You know what?" I said. "You're absolutely right. You don't need me." I stood up, walked to my car, and drove to the bank, the joint account we'd all been contributing to, the one with about $15,000 that I'd scraped together from working myself to death. I cleaned it out, every penny. It was my money anyway. I'd put in probably 80% of what was there. Then I drove back to the house, packed my stuff, and loaded up my Honda Civic. His mom was still in the kitchen, probably thinking I'd gone to pout somewhere and would come back apologizing. When she saw me with my suitcases, her tune changed real quick. "What are you doing?" she asked, and for the first time in months, she actually looked worried. "Taking your advice," I said cheerfully. "You said you don't need me, so I'm leaving. Thanks for helping me realize I was wasting my time here." I called Jake from the road and told him I'd moved out, that I was done, and that he could figure out his living situation without me. He was confused at first, then angry, then panicky as the reality set in. Without my income, they couldn't afford the utilities, groceries, or his mom's medical bills. The house might have been paid off, but everything else required money they didn't have. Jake tried calling me dozens of times over the next few days. So did his mom, suddenly very interested in negotiating. But I was done negotiating. I'd found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. No one to clean up after, no one criticizing how I lived my life, no one taking advantage of my good nature. The best part? I quit the retail job immediately. Turns out when you're not supporting 3 people on your income, 1 job is plenty. I had my evenings back, my weekends back, my sanity back. I reconnected with friends, started dating again, remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of a servant. Update. You guys are not going to believe the messages I've been getting from them. The desperation is real, and honestly, it's both satisfying and sad at the same time. What would you do if they offered to give you everything you wanted to come back? Jake kept trying to convince me to come back. He'd swing between anger and desperation, sometimes calling me selfish, sometimes begging me to reconsider. He didn't understand why I wouldn't just forgive and forget, why I couldn't see that his mom was just scared and didn't mean what she said. But his mom's messages were the real entertainment. At first, she was defiant. I was being dramatic. I'd taken money that didn't belong to me. I was tearing the family apart. Then reality started setting in. The electricity got shut off. They couldn't afford groceries. Her medical appointments had to be canceled because there was no money and no one to drive her. The messages got increasingly desperate. Maybe we could work out a payment plan for me to come back. Maybe she could help out more around the house. Maybe we could all sit down and figure out a fair arrangement. Each message was a little more panicked than the last, like watching someone slowly realize they'd burned down their own house. The funniest part was when she tried to guilt-trip me about Jake. Poor Jake was so stressed, working extra hours trying to make ends meet. Poor Jake was having to do all the cooking and cleaning because his mom's back was bothering her again. Poor Jake didn't deserve to suffer because of our disagreement. But Jake was a grown man who'd chosen his mother over his wife at every opportunity. He'd watched me work myself to exhaustion and thought it was perfectly reasonable. He'd dismissed my concerns, invalidated my feelings, and expected me to be grateful for the privilege of being treated like unpaid help. So no, I didn't feel sorry for Jake having to face the consequences of his choices. The breaking point for them came about 6 weeks after I left. His mom ended up in the ER. Nothing serious, just a panic attack, but the bill was substantial. Without insurance coverage for mental health emergencies and no money to pay, they were looking at serious debt. That's when Jake finally understood the full scope of what I'd been contributing. He showed up at my apartment one evening looking haggard and desperate. He'd lost weight, had bags under his eyes, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I get it now, he said. I see what you were dealing with. Mom's been impossible since you left. She expects me to do everything you were doing, and I can barely keep up. I'm working 60-hour weeks and still can't pay all the bills. I don't know how you managed for so long. It was validation I didn't know I needed. Hearing him acknowledge what I'd been trying to tell him for months felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, but it was too little, too late. The thing is, I told him, I tried to tell you this was unsustainable. I tried to explain that your mom was taking advantage, that the situation wasn't fair, but you didn't want to hear it. You only care now because it's affecting you. He begged me to come back, promised things would be different, said he'd stand up to his mom, enforce boundaries, make sure I was treated with respect. But promises are easy when you're desperate, and I'd learned the hard way that actions matter more than words. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that they'd lost the house, couldn't keep up with the utilities, taxes, and maintenance without my income. His mom moved in with her sister in another state, and Jake got a small apartment closer to his work. The family unit that was supposedly so important had completely fallen apart the moment it required actual sacrifice from anyone other than me. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The apartment turned into a small house when I got promoted at work. Turns out when you're not exhausted all the time, you perform better professionally. I started taking weekend trips, joined a hiking group, learned to paint, basic stuff that normal people do, but it felt revolutionary after years of having no time or energy for myself. The money I'd taken from the joint account, I used it as a down payment on my house. Every dollar I'd earned through 60-hour work weeks while they sat around expecting to be taken care of went toward building my own future instead of subsidizing their dysfunction. Jake texted me a few months ago. His mom had been asking about me, wondering if I was still angry. She apparently told him she'd been willing to apologize and work things out, but I'd been too stubborn to listen. It was fascinating how quickly the narrative had shifted, from "we don't need you" to "she abandoned us in our time of need." But that's the thing about people who take advantage. They never see themselves as the problem. In her mind, I was supposed to be endlessly grateful for the opportunity to serve them. When I finally said no, I became the villain in their story. The truth is, leaving was the best decision I ever made. Not just because I escaped an unfair situation, but because it taught me to value myself. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that family obligations have limits, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones taking the most advantage. I'm dating someone new now, a teacher who thinks my work ethic is admirable but also makes sure I take time to relax. We split household chores without negotiation, contribute equally to shared expenses, and treat each other like partners instead of parent and child. It's amazing how normal, healthy relationships feel revolutionary when you've been in a toxic situation. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd continued trying to make an impossible situation work. Would I have burned out completely? Would I have lost myself entirely trying to please people who couldn't be pleased? The thought honestly terrifies me. So to anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, you deserve better. You deserve to be appreciated, not taken for granted. You deserve partners who support you, not exploit you. And you definitely deserve in-laws who see you as family, not free labor. The best revenge really is living well. While they're dealing with the consequences of their choices, I'm building the life I always wanted. And the house I bought with that joint account. Money? It has the most beautiful garden, and I'm the only one who has to take care of it.